Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Manchester City and Liverpool were the two Premier League sides that many people predicted to be legitimate title contenders this season. However, their match at Anfield provided us with a dull affair. How did Liverpool approach Manchester City? Why couldn't Manchester City score against Liverpool? And how did Liverpool try to press them? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down Liverpool against Manchester City. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up. You could click the ring bell below if you want daily notifications about our organic, unfiltered soccer analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're going to break down the first half and kind of showcase how Manchester City approached the game without the ball, how Liverpool pressed, and get into the second half and see what changes either side made to get an edge on the game. But first, let's get to the lineups. We look at Manchester City, more of a 4-2-3-1 with Sergio Aguero up top, David Silva just in behind him. They went with direct wide players in Raheem Sterling and Riyad Mahrez out in wide areas, and in more of a double pivot, they had Bernardo Silva a bit deeper alongside Fernandinho, and Benjamin Mendy returned to the lineup. Then we get to Liverpool. No real surprises here. 4-3-3, Roberto Firmino up front, Mo Salah and Sadio Mane out in wider areas. In midfield, Naby Keita wasn't fit to start, so they went with Jordan Henderson at the pivot, and in the shuttling roles, they went with James Milner, and they went with Wijnaldum. And then when you look at the back, they did make a few changes in the sense that Gomez played on the right and Dejan Lovren went into center back with Virgil van Dijk. But first, when we get into this game, we have to look to how City approached this game because it was a bit different than we expected. They weren't really pressing too high from the front, and they were really composed and organized without the ball. So when we get into Manchester City's shape, 4-2-3-1 against 4-3-3, what was evident here at the start was that City allowed Liverpool's center backs to push forward. It was 2v1 there, but out in wide areas, Mahrez and Sterling were very tight on Gomez and Robertson, so they ensured that they couldn't really push forward, and any time that they did receive the ball, they were pressed, and that left a midfield battle. Silva often stayed on Henderson. He has a great range of passing, so we want to ensure that he couldn't clip out diagonals out into the wider areas, or more so facilitate passes into the front three. And then you had Fernandinho and Bernardo kind of man marking or patrolling the space that Wijnaldum and Milner took up. Liverpool didn't really create any chances. A lot of it stemmed down to the fact that their front three were very poor. They couldn't really get balls into Firmino, who often dropped off deeper to try and pick up the ball and build play. But Salah wasn't very good from the offset. Neither was Mane, and it made it very easy for Manchester City, and more so due to the fact that they were very organized without the ball. When they weren't pressing from the front, dropping into two banks of four, compressing the spaces very in the midfield to ensure that Liverpool players couldn't receive it between the lines. Henderson's obviously taken out of the play, so a lot of the times they wanted Lovren and they wanted Van Dijk to push forward, and they couldn't really get overlaps into the attacking positions that they wanted to get into in the final third. And when you look at it as a whole, Liverpool never really created any chances in the first half. In the grand scheme of things, neither Ederson or Alisson really were forced into great saves in the first half either. When you think about it, a lot of the chances that did stem came from loose balls, came from individual battles that were won. One example, for instance, is Gomez nodding the ball over Sterling, and then Laporte doesn't judge it well, and it falls to Salah. Stones comes across, and Salah cuts in, but Salah bends his shot inches wide of the net. You have another example where they had somewhat of a 3v2 down their left-hand side, where Mahrez stepped to Robertson, but for some reason we had Bernardo Silva tracking, and Mane was able to run across him, skip by him, but his cross delivered into the box did not get to Salah because Mendy clipped it out for a corner kick. Besides that, they were really trying to run the gauntlet, trying to push forward when they could, because they weren't able to really force City into mistakes with their pressing. And some of the chances that they did get, a lot of the times they wanted to isolate Walker against Mane. But on both occasions, Walker was pretty solid in that aspect. You had Firmino dropping out into that right-hand space, and you had Walker easily dispossess him. You had a ball played into Mane, and Mane let it run across him, but Walker tracked it well and was able to deal with that threat. So when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, even if Walker was beat, you had Stones coming across to ensure that no danger was played down the left-hand side. And then when you think about Salah down the right-hand side, the same thing kind of happened. Van Dijk just clipped a hopeful ball into that space. Mendy doesn't judge it well, so then the ball goes over, it becomes a race. They both end up chasing the ball. Salah pushes it by him, but Laporte comes across. In the air, Laporte and Stones were solid. Out in wide areas, Mendy and Walker did a pretty solid job, although Mendy did have a few individual mental lapses. But in the grand scheme of things, City were very solid without the ball. They won their individual battles in the sense that they pressed well and they ensured that Robertson and Gomez didn't get forward. They ensured that Wijnaldum and Milner didn't really affect the game. Like I said, another example is Lovren pushing forward, sliding the ball between Fernandinho and Stones for Wijnaldum. Then you have Milner running across. Milner makes the run across. What happens there? He waits for the Gomez overload. Gomez comes across as well, but Mendy's able to push over and clear danger. Like I said, a lot of 1v1 battles, that were won by City opposed to Liverpool. And with Liverpool unable to really inflict any sort of pressure with their pressing and not really being able to create chances from open play, it was about City in the first half and how they were able to bypass Liverpool's press and attempt to create chances in Liverpool's third. So when we get to Liverpool and how they look to press and approach the game, you look at Manchester City and you have to see the personnel that they have out on the field. You have Sterling out to the left, who's going to try and run at Gomez, and then you can have the Mendy overlap, especially with Salah not being able to track back. That forces the shuttlers out in Wijnaldum and Milner, and eventually that creates space for Silva to pick up the ball. On the other side, what happens there is if you play it out to Mahrez, you either have to pull out a center back or you have to put out Milner again because you're going to have Walker making the overlapping run. Will they do that at Anfield? It's a bit adventurous, but knowing Manchester City, you can't take any risks. So what they want to do to ensure that Silva couldn't get the ball between the lines or in spaces if the shuttlers pushed out into those wider areas to protect the fullbacks was to press from the front. And this is probably the most adventurous pressing we've seen from Liverpool this season, based on the fact that they've often dropped off, like I've said in previous videos, into more of a 4-5-1 with the wider players just looking to block off the space into the fullbacks and those passing lanes. They kind of did the same thing here in the opening stages, and it worked in the opening 2 minutes when they were able to dispossess Manchester City and win the ball back in Manchester City's third. How they were able to do that? Well, what happens here is that you see the center back split. You have Firmino blocking off the ball carrier, so when Fernandinho was able to drop in, he blocks off the passing lane, and he's looking to cut off any pass from Ederson into that channel. What happens here now is that you have Salah cutting off the passing lane from Laporte into Mendy, and obviously looking to close Laporte when he can, and then you have Mane doing the same with Walker and Stones. So with Fernandinho dropping in and Firmino blocking off the passing lane, you have to look at the options that they do have. They could obviously punt it long, but they weren't looking to do that. And in that instance, what happens here is that you have Laporte, then you have Stones, balls played into Stones. What happens is as they nick it around, Firmino and Mane are getting closer. Once the pass goes into Stones, they get into a position where they can play that pass in. What happens is Stones plays the pass quickly into Ederson as Mane looks to get into Stones, plays it back to him, and now the ball is able to be facilitated out to Walker. With that being said, Milner's already on his way to go forward and step in there. So Walker instantly plays it into Bernardo Silva, but Robertson steps to him quickly and is able to dispossess. It's a bit risky given the fact that Liverpool weren't really looking to push the fullbacks forward with their press. It didn't look very cohesive based on the fact that you do have a very quick counter-attacking options with Sterling, with Mahrez, with Aguero, and then the creativity of Silva. So that was one way they could go about it. It worked there. And then we look at the other way that they could go about it was dropping off into more of a 4-5-1. And what happens here is when they drop off into more of a 4-5-1, the same thing kind of applies, is that they look to cover off the spaces. You have Fernandinho dropping off a bit deeper. You have the center backs, and what happens here is that you want Firmino to block off the passing lane to Fernandinho. So he does that again. You have the fullbacks pushing forward. With the fullbacks pushing forward, that does leave Salah and Mane blocking off those passing lanes once again. And with that being said, if he's blocking off those passing lanes, now you're seeing what Liverpool are trying to do. So Firmino's getting closer to Stones. What happens there is that Stones ends up playing it to Laporte. With Laporte getting the ball. You have Salah pushing out there. And what happens is that because both of them are pulled out, Laporte is able to play that ball into Fernandinho. Fernandinho gets the ball, and you see Wijnaldum instantly push out to Mendy. So that pass would have been blocked off regardless. But Henderson steps into him. When Henderson steps into him, he's dispossessed. The ball falls out to Salah, and Salah instantly looks to play it in between Stones and Walker for Mane, who comes across, but he doesn't control the ball. And again, we're seeing how Liverpool are trying to really get at them, because when you think about it, if Firmino blocks off the passing lane to Fernandinho, Fernandinho's also pressed by Fernandinho's also pressed by Henderson, and then you have Bernardo Silva, and who's going to be pressed by Milner. And then you look at it as a whole, you want Henderson virtually on Silva, but at the same time, you have to get that pressing trap in, and that's what they tried to do there. And Liverpool got the ball and were able to push forward, but we didn't see many moments of this because Manchester City were able to quickly move the ball, and they always had an overload in certain areas, and we're going to get to how they were able to do that right now. So now we look into how City bypassed Liverpool's pressing. That was the key talking point of the game, and more so the first half. City didn't create many chances throughout the first half, but they were able to bypass Liverpool's pressing, and that was Liverpool's key approach, which is why it was so pivotal. When we get to it, there are so many situations that we could break down. We broke down 4 various situations that really highlighted what City were doing and the issues that Liverpool had with their disjointed pressing, and that was one of the big issues here. So when we think about it, we have Liverpool in their 4-3-3. They don't want to push Robertson or Gomez a bit higher to try and chase the ball, because that could leave Sterling and Mahrez free to break on goal against the center backs, and they weren't really looking to drop back either, so that forces the Liverpool fullbacks to stay into their position. The same thing applies to Silva and Henderson, more so Henderson dropping off in case Silva does push into that space. Henderson has to ensure that there's cover in behind him and to ensure that one of the City's front 3 attackers don't get on the ball and are able to run on goal, so he often kept himself at bay. When we look at the first opportunity that stems from it is when City were more of a back 4 in their build-up. Like I said, you have Liverpool trying to press through the front 3, but with Ederson playing the ball out to Walker, who stayed out on the edge, you have Mane stepping to him, you have Firmino stepping to Stones, you have Salah cutting off the pass between Laporte and Mendy. What happens there is that as Mane presses, the ball's played back to Ederson, and Ederson instantly plays it back to Laporte. No one steps to Laporte, and what happens there is that with both players pressing and now Firmino possibly looking to make that run into that space, what happens is that Silva drops off, and already you have Bernardo dropped off with Milner, so that's key. So the ball is played into Silva. Silva now looks to play it back to Walker. When he plays it back to Walker, because Silva was harried by Henderson, plays it back to Walker, Mane steps back to him, he ends up playing the ball back to Stones. The ball back to Stones, Firmino steps, Stones waits until the last second for Firmino to get to him, plays it to Laporte. Now with Laporte there, and you have Salah and Firmino pressed out, Fernandinho drops in, ball is played to him, City are able to push forward, and that was a great passing move from them. So much confidence. The center backs able to play with the ball comfortably. They're able to push forward, offer another additional midfield threat when needed be, and they're able to distribute the ball from long range. And we saw that throughout the game. You saw Stones, Ederson, and Laporte constantly finding Mendy over Salah. You had Laporte constantly looking to find Mahrez. There was one time where Wijnaldum tracked Bernardo. He tracks him. Laporte clips it over them. Mahrez is able to get on the ball. Another time, Laporte clips a long diagonal over to Mahrez in an advanced wider position. The problem with Mahrez is that Walker, when he did overlap, his crosses weren't getting into the box. The other thing was that when Mahrez went 1v1, either Van Dijk pushed over or Henderson pushed over to ensure that he wasn't able to cut in onto his left foot. So that was a big problem for them as well. Stones was constantly able to get the ball over to Mendy. There's a time where it was Salah and Milner, and he was able to instantly sliced the ball out to Mendy, and Mendy was the main outlet going forward, so that was pivotal for Liverpool. Now we get to pivotal for Manchester City. Now we get to another opportunity where you see Walker kind of slide into a back 3, and we've seen this throughout the season where Walker slides in to form a back 3 when they do have the ball, and it allows Mendy to push forward to offer the width. What happens here is that when he does do that, we have the front 3 pressing the front 3, but the midfield 3 not keen on dropping dropping off. So what ends up happening here is that with the midfield three not willing to drop off, what happens is that you see Fernandinho drop off, you see Bernardo drop off, they're able to get onto the ball, and that is what Manchester City wanted them to do. So they drop into that space. You have Fernandinho dropping in between Salah and Firmino. You have Bernardo dropping in between Firmino and Mane. It ends up happening that Bernardo gets the ball, he drives forward, and then Firmino harries him and then eventually fouls him. Another instance. Then we see Liverpool try to rectify that. What happens there is that now you have the midfield three kind of sliced in, and what happens there is that the midfield three now is occupied. This is what Manchester City are able to do, because now you have the back three against the front three. There's so much space. What they do is that they're able to clip the ball over Salah into Mendy. Like I said, he's able to drive forward. This should lead to a break based on the fact that now you kind of have 4v4, but he plays a pass into Sterling that Gomez is able to intercept, and he should do better in that regard, but he doesn't. And when you look at that, again, another way that they're able to bypass Liverpool's pressing, clipping the ball out into Mendy. Mendy's able to push forward, and that was pivotal for Manchester City. Then we look to the final opportunity. This is when they tried to push Robertson forward. They tried to get Walker pressed out of the game, and this is when Keita comes on for Milner, who came off injured. What happens there is that Keita ends up stepping to Walker, who gets the ball played out to him, but Bernardo instantly drives into that space, and Keita should be marking him. So that already guides, it's a risk that Liverpool are taking. Ball played out to Bernardo, Robertson gamble, steps to him, not knowing that Silva dropped off Henderson, plays the ball out to him, and now you have a free avenue for Mahrez. Luckily for Liverpool, Van Dijk was able to come across and make a vital interception, but again, that is another area where Liverpool were being harmed. The fact that Silva was able to pop up to either side of Henderson to pick up the ball, the midfield gap, he was able to drop off into the pockets. The same thing applies to Aguero, the same thing applies to Sterling. The only thing that City were lacking was that cutting edge in the final third to create a chance to force Alisson to a save. But in terms of overcoming Liverpool's main approach, they did that with flying colors. And now going into the second half, it was about Klopp looking to rectify the mistakes that Liverpool made in regards to their pressing. Should he press from the front? Should he sit off? And how Guardiola was going to move forward and try to get City to score the opening goal. So then we get to the second half, and the second half is mainly about Manchester City and how they were able to create more chances. Liverpool tried to press from the front, but again, we would see Fernandinho, we'd see Bernardo drop off into that space to pick up the ball, and eventually as they dropped off, it did allow those two to still move into the space to pick up the ball, but now they were closer to the shuttlers and they were able to be pressed. But when you think about Liverpool's chance, when you think about Manchester City's chances, a lot of it stemmed from the fact that Mahrez eventually stepped up, the fact that there was more space for them to really attack. Fernandinho played a key role, Silva, the entire front line eventually got it going, and Liverpool didn't really have answers for it. When you break down the chances, they were created in so many various ways, and again, we have to think about where Liverpool went wrong. Was it fatigue? Was it Klopp's poor setup? We look at the first one. Again, it's just Aguero dropping off, linking play with David Silva, and what happens here is that you have Mahrez running in between Van Dijk and Robertson, and Silva slides it into him. Robertson is able to track him, but Mahrez holds him off, then makes another step and flashes a shot to the reverse post wide of the net. Again, warning sign for Manchester City, for Liverpool, but it's really important that Liverpool pick up these markers and ensure that they win these 1v1 duels, and they weren't doing it. Look at another opportunity again, where it just stems from Fernandinho winning the ball ahead of Wijnaldum, stepping forward, and then bypassing Joe Gomez with Sterling and running across Henderson. And what happens there is that a cross is delivered into the box. It's eventually picked up by Keita, but Keita's poor pass to Robertson ends up seeing Bernardo step to him, dispossess him, and then you have Mahrez picking up the ball in behind Robertson, across Van Dijk. Van Dijk's able to hold him out. He fires a shot on goal that Alisson pushes away. Another warning sign for this side, and it's big. It's a big worry for Liverpool, given the fact they're just quickly bypassing them in midfield. You look to another opportunity that they're able to create. This one stems from a Fernandinho back heel. Sterling comes across. He's able to hold off Henderson. And when he holds off Henderson, what happens here is that now you see him play the ball into David Silva, who drops off. Keita's there with him, and they bypass Keita, and it ends up falling to Bernardo Silva. Mane's already tracking, but what happens here is that he's able to hold off Mane, and Mane ends up tracking him all the way to where Joe Gomez is. Now the pass is played out to Sterling. They both attract to Sterling. Bernardo continues his run into that space. Bernardo's flash cross is ended up pushed away by Alisson, and it falls to Mahrez. At that point, you already have Gabriel Jesus, who came on for Sergio Aguero, trying to attack it with Robertson. It falls to Mahrez, who now takes on Robertson, cuts in outside, and fires a shot on goal. That, again, is pushed away by the keeper. Mahrez was playing a key role. They were getting their chances from those routes, but Alisson stood tall, and that was key. When you think about the changes that Liverpool ended up making after that, Liverpool ended up bringing on Daniel Sturridge for Roberto Firmino. That was the change up front. And then when you think about Manchester City, Leroy Sané ended up coming on for Raheem Sterling. But as the game continued, now it was more about Gabriel Jesus, and now he was getting involved. Mahrez dominated the first half of the second half, but then Jesus played a key role as well. And what Jesus offers you is pressing, energy, lacking the goals, but he offers so much in various ways that it made sense for him to run at a tired Liverpool side. And what happened here was the fact that the first play that Jesus really does get involved, and a lot of it was down the flanks with battles against Lovren. He ends up dropping off and holding off Van Dijk. So he holds off Van Dijk. Henderson comes across. What happens here is that Jesus is able to hit the ball off Henderson, play it back to Silva. Now there's space to attack. He runs into that space. Lovren comes across. Lovren makes a big tackle. Another play stemmed from a throw-in where he was able to get it from Mendy. He's able to turn his marker and then run at goal, but then Lovren was able to cut him off again. And then the third opportunity sees Fernandinho just easily brush off Salah, brushes him off. And what happens here is that from there is that he's able to play the pass. Fernandinho is able to get in between the two shuttlers, and once he gets in between the two shuttlers, you have Gabriel Jesus in between the two center backs. He runs off the center backs. The pass is played in there because Gomez is high, and Lovren tracks him, but again, he is stopped by Lovren. 3 opportunities, 3 times Lovren stops him from getting on goal. How does this boil over? But again, when we get to the build-up to the penalty kick, what happens here is that it's actually Gomez intercepting a Laporte pass, and it falls to Salah, but Fernandinho again steps ahead of him. Mendy now plays a pass that was intended for Sané. He misses it. It falls to Gabriel Jesus, who holds off Lovren, plays it back into Silva, and now Silva's able to play the pass in between the two center backs for Sané breaking off. Van Dijk comes across. Van Dijk takes him out. Mahrez skies his kick, which is fortunate for Liverpool, but at the end of the day, City were fully valued of a point, perhaps 3, and for Liverpool, after a tough week, 2 games against Chelsea, now Napoli, and then City, they really looked tired. They really looked like they weren't up for it, and they struggled here throughout. But let me know what you guys think. As we go into the international break, 3 top teams stuck at 20 points, but which one is better? Who deserved to win here? Was it City? Was it Liverpool? Can Liverpool keep up the intensity that we saw from last season and mount a title challenge, or did they hit their peak last season? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.